Today we have the honor of sitting down with Sahil Bloom. Sahil is an investor and entrepreneur who started his career managing $3.5 billion in assets at a private equity firm. Since then, he's become one of the most respected voices in business with a combined audience of 3 million across LinkedIn, Instagram, X, and his newsletter. He counts Apple CEO Tim Cook among his mentors. Most recently, he published his first book, The 5 Types of Wealth, which became an instant New York Times bestseller. So in this episode, we tackle the big questions on money and wealth building. Does money truly lead to happiness? And what do we sacrifice in the pursuit of money? How do we define what enough is in our lives? Taking this a step further, we break down the rising cost of living, practical strategies for generating income, managing expenses, and growing your investments. Finally, we expand the concept of wealth, exploring what it truly means to live a holistic, integrative life. Sahil breaks down the essential roles of time, purpose, and relationships in building true wealth, bringing it all together in what was nothing short of a masterclass. So without further ado, Sahil Bloom. So I wanted to begin this conversation talking about a mindset that you talk about in the book that consumes a lot of people, and it seemed like it had consumed you at one point. And that could be summed up by this phrase of like not having enough or never enough. I think a lot of people, tuning into this, feel that in a lot of ways in the sense that like if they had enough resources or if they had enough money, like their life would be set and they'd reach this point of happiness. And so they're set on this kind of idea of wealth in their minds. And so one of the core values that we have as a company is nuance. And I really loved how you kind of talked about that subject and even the way that you talk about financial wealth and money in the book. And I think it could be summed up by one sentence that you wrote. You wrote, money isn't nothing. It simply can't be the only thing. And so when it comes to this concept of not having enough, can you share more like about your baseline philosophy of that?
Sure. I do think that the human tendency is to reset baselines. Mm-hmm. This is actually a common biological predisposition that we have. It's hedonic adaptation. We reset to whatever the new baseline is that's been established. So today's version of more becomes tomorrow's version of not enough as you just continue to inflate over periods of time. The things that your younger self would have prayed for become the things that your present self complains about over and over again in your life. We see that. The house that we prayed for becomes the house that we grumble is too small. The relationship that we prayed for becomes the relationship that we complain about. The jewelry that we were excited about becomes the one that we need to upgrade over and over and over again in our lives. We see that. And it's this unfortunate self-fulfilling prophecy where you are making your happiness in life conditional. You are saying, when I get X, then I'll be happy. And that X could be money, it could be status, it could be a bonus, a promotion, a thing, whatever it might be. You are making your happiness conditional on some summit, something that exists in the future. But humans are very good at allowing that thing to be a mirage. You start getting closer to it and it disappears and reappears on the horizon. It's the sort of modern day version of the Sisyphean struggle. Sisyphus, this ancient creature, pushes the boulder to the top of the hill. And then suddenly the boulder rolls all the way back down to the bottom and he has to begin again. It's the eternal futile struggle. We are all facing our own version of that. And the ability to wrestle with that, to navigate that tension and to identify what enough truly means to you as a life, not as a number, but as an actual lifestyle, is how I personally wrestle with it to try to understand it in my own life.
Yeah, that's really good. I mean, a lot of people, when it comes to having resources or money, I think the average listener has heard from people that have more wealth or more money that like money doesn't buy happiness. And then I think that initially what they then think is, okay, well, if money doesn't buy happiness, why don't they just give up all their money and then they would be happy? And so what do you think of that phrase?
It's not true.
Yeah.
Money does buy happiness, but only up to a point. And the science on this is actually very clear. In the earlier days of your life, money directly buys happiness. And there is clear scientific evidence to support this, that as you are coming up the income curve, money has a direct linear relationship, if you will, with happiness. As you increase your income, you are able to afford basic things, food, shelter, you reduce the fundamental burdens or stresses in your life, you can take care of the people around you, you can have basic pleasures like vacations, experiences, etc. Very direct relationship with happiness. The unfortunate thing that happens is that on that early curve, you start to create this pattern in your mind that when the money bell rings, you get an incremental amount of happiness. And that creates this pattern that you think is going to persist forever, because humans are not that different than mice, right? It's like ring the bell, you get the cheese. Over and over again, you're told that in the early part of the curve. So then you believe that that will persist forever, but it doesn't. And as you get above those early years, that early thresholds, the diminishing returns very much do set in your life. So if you continue to chase money, thinking that it is going to provide that incremental happiness, what happens is you get more and more narrowly focused on the one thing at the expense of everything else. So when I say that line, money isn't nothing, it simply can't be the only thing, that is what I'm referring to. It's as you get past those early years, you need to recognize that your incremental happiness is going to be driven by using money as a tool, not having money be the goal.
Yeah, I think it's an important concept to understand, because as we talk about like the other things about time and social and mental and physical, all of these things, I feel like people get so hung up on the money thing and the resources thing, and I think that one of the most brilliant kind of charts or ways that you laid this out, where you came up with these 5 levels of financial wealth, and when I read that and I looked through these different levels, like I could immediately sense where things would start shifting for people, and why, if you're at the beginning levels, why things might be stressful for you. So can you explain like what those 5 levels are? And I think it'll help map it out for people.
The way I think about the 5 levels of financial wealth is basically this progression that you will go through during your own life from level 1, which is you have yet to meet your basic needs, like the basic things of food, shelter, being able to take care of the people around you. If you think of that as like, once you have met those, that's level 1. You're probably not listening to this if you have not reached level 1. You're focusing on other things in order to meet those levels. The progression from there to level 5 is fundamentally about increasing income and an asset base that allows you to generate and cover your expenses with. At level 5, your assets are generating enough income to cover all potential levels of basic needs and pleasures that you could want. And so the progression up that is basically increasing income, investing that into things that will compound and generate income for you. I would think of basic financial independence as being at that level 4-ish, where you have sufficient income coming off your assets to cover all basic needs and basic pleasures in your life. So that's like all of your, basic expenses that you have on a monthly basis are covered by the cash flow coming off your asset base, and you can afford all of the basic pleasures that you could want, vacations, different things, experiences in your life.
Yeah, I think in those lower levels, I was looking up some research on this before this interview. I think 40% of the population is living paycheck to paycheck. So they probably, in some senses, find themselves in that first category. And then I think even when it came to the people that 21% of workers in the United States are making over 100,000. And so even for people in that group, 36% are still living paycheck to paycheck, which is really interesting, because if you think about this compared to maybe our parents' generation, there's been a lot of shift in terms of inflation, in terms of how much things cost a day. A lot of Scott Galloway's work that he did, earlier this year. I'm not sure how familiar with it, but he was just talking about how this like rising cost of living is really affecting millennials and Generation Z in a negative way, in terms of the baseline of what financially secure means has just risen to a whole nother level. What is your kind of opinion or take on that?
I think it's absolutely true. And I think it's a combination of structural increases in the cost of living that Scott has talked about, and a societal and emotional side, which is the pressures that we all experience to do the keeping up with the Joneses thing.
Yeah.
In a social media age, that cultural and emotional and psychological side is just as powerful as the actual structural increasing cost, because there are a lot of things that people think they need because it's just part of being a member of society. Yeah. Someone earning $100,000 a year and feeling like they need to spend a whole bunch of money on fancy jewelry, things, expensive cars, live in the fancy neighborhood, have the golf club members, like do a bunch of these things just because of the pressures of the environment around them, that is structurally keeping you in a paycheck to paycheck loop when there's no fundamental reason that you need to be. And that's a really unfortunate reality of the social media age that we live in. One of the questions that I often ask myself, and one that I contemplate in the book, is this, I call it the bot status test, of asking yourself before you buy something, would I buy this thing if I couldn't tell a single person that I had it, or couldn't take a picture of it, couldn't show it to anyone else? Would I get this thing? Oftentimes the answer is no. That thing that you're about to get, the watch, the car, whatever it is that you're about to spend money on, a lot of times it is because you want to show it to other people. You want other people to know that you have it. You are doing it for the pleasure of someone else, not because you actually love watches or you actually love car engineering and it makes you really happy. It's because you want other people to recognize you and you think that that is going to confer a level of respect and admiration on you. Unfortunately, those things are fleeting. The thing that you thought was going to get that lasting respect and admiration will not. You have to earn those kind of things. It's not bought. And a lot of people trap themselves into a life by feeling like they need to continue to just keep up with whatever it is that the societal norm of acquisition is at any moment in time.
I love that test. And I think that, and we'll get to this, you have a lot of really practical strategies for how people should manage their expenses and things like that. And I think a lot of that stuff it's almost like an emotional subconscious thing that we just get wrapped up into doing. And, taking time and not necessarily acting on that purchase immediately is one idea that I was really struck by.
I do think that just on that point, a lot of that comes down to the fact that we as a culture and society are so laser focused and tied into money being the measure of our entire lives, which is the fundamental meta point of this entire book or concept. Is when that's the only thing that you measure, that is the sole focus of your life. You are going to lean into the thing that you can measure. Peter Drucker, the management theorist, has this famous quote: "What gets measured gets managed." It's the thing that you can measure ends up being the thing that you narrowly hone in on and optimize around. And that, as a cultural thing around money being the most measurable thing, means that all of our focus goes towards that one thing. So you lose sight of all of the other ways that you might measure living a good and wealthy life. And so my belief around that is basically there are a lot of people out there who have been convinced that they are not doing very well when the scoreboard is just around money. But if you were to zoom out and think about the bigger picture of their life across these 5 types of wealth, they are very wealthy. One of my good friends from my college years decided after college to move back to his hometown, and he became a gym teacher and coaches high school sports teams. Stanford degree, went back, moved home to be a gym teacher and coach high school sports. On the surface, cultural level, looking at it at a national level, you would say he's not doing particularly well. You'd be like, he's making $50,000 a year with a Stanford degree. It doesn't make a lot of sense. Why is he doing this? But when you zoom out and look at the bigger picture of his life, he lives close to both sets of parents. He has 2 beautiful, healthy children. He's married very happily. He gets to be outside all the time. He's super fit. He gets to work with kids. He absolutely loves that. He loves coaching. It gives him tons of energy, and he has tons of free time. He works from like 9 to 3 every single day. And so in the bigger picture of his life, he's doing extremely well. But on a cultural standard level, you would tell him and someone like that they're not wealthy. So the whole point here is, I think we need to redefine how we think about what a wealthy life looks like. And we need to celebrate a different kind of success story, not just the one that we've been told is the one we should worship.
Yeah, I think that's so good and so rich because, and there are a lot of things that go into that. I think that when you're kind of holistically, when you're considering your life as a whole, holistically between all these different things, it really would affect your decision making in what you pursue and what life you pursue. Like, I mean, we're filming this in New York City. Obviously, New York City has become like very expensive. And so what it means to live here is not the same as what it means maybe to live in a smaller city in the Midwest or something like that. And the things that you prioritize. And even, living in New York City, you kind of get swept up into the mindset that you're talking about versus other areas. Maybe the influence of that wouldn't be as great. And so I think it's a really a really special thing to think about your life in like a more integrative kind of way. I think the process of like defining what enough looks like for you is an interesting one because it's almost like it's hard to divorce yourself from what everybody else is thinking or the pressures of what society is saying what enough should look like for your life. And it's like what is actually what I want versus what society is telling me that I should want. So, in terms of that process of like defining what's enough, like how would you advise people to go about doing that for themselves?
I think there's a couple things I would say here. I would start with one very important realization, which I would say is a realization that changed my entire life, which was that I realized one day that the people that I read books about are very rarely people I would ever trade lives with. The people that we celebrate and admire as having built these incredible things that we read the books about have broken lives in a whole lot of areas that I really value. You go and celebrate someone for being a billionaire, for having made all this money, and you ignore the fact that they have 4 ex-wives and 3 children who don't talk to them. And we tell that person, we pat them on the back and we say that they won the game. And you have to ask yourself the question, is that actually a game that I care to win? Someone might care to win it. That's fine. That's great. But do I care to win that game? Is that a mountain that I actually want to climb? Or is it a mountain that I've just been handed, that I've convinced myself is the one that I chose? Mm-hmm. So many of us in life are just marching up a mountain blindly, not asking ourselves the question, not taking the time to pause, to create space, to zoom out and ask ourselves, is this actually a mountain that I care to reach the top of? And is this actually a mountain that I care to be climbing up? Am I enjoying the actual climb up this mountain? And if not, you should step back and walk back down it to find the right one for you. We live in this speed-obsessed culture where everything is about how fast can you get from point A to point B. Everything is about, I got to get Forbes 30 under 30, or I got to make this much money by this age. All of these things, it's all about speed. Life is much more about direction than speed. It's so much better to climb slowly up the right mountain than it is to climb fast up the wrong one. The second thing I'll say is the entire idea of enough has to be grounded around the actual life that it looks like. It's not about a number. The first thing when you tell someone like, what is enough to you? They'll say $10 million. I have no idea what that means, what that looks like, what that life looks like. When I was starting out in my finance career and people would have asked me that question, I would have said $100 million. I want to make $100 million. Why? What does that actually allow you to do? What does the life actually look like that you are trying to build? What is your enough life? So the visualization that I walk through in the book is exactly that. What does your enough life look like? What are you doing? Where are you? Who are you with? How do you feel? What are you able to do on an annual basis? What kind of vacations are you taking? What are you thinking about? What are you driven by? All of these questions to actually define very clearly, visually, what that life actually looks like. And importantly, it doesn't need to be Spartan or bare. Like there's this tendency to say like, oh, well, enough has to be like, I'm really living below my means. I'm doing all these things. Absolutely not. You can have a grand vision for your enough life. It just needs to be yours. It can't be something that you've just accepted from other people. My enough life has 2 houses because I really care about bringing people I love together to create amazing experiences. It has nothing to do with me being able to tell people I have a second house and like, hey, I have a house in the Hamptons. I don't care about that. I care about creating experiences for people. So it has that. And that's part of the vision that I have. The point of creating the vision is it's much harder for a clear vision of a life to disappear and reappear at an inflated level than it is for a number to do that. A number will do that on its own. Yeah. But the vision of the life, it's much more tangible. It's much more real.
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah, when you were talking, it made me think about, I'm almost done with Walter Isaacson's book on Elon Musk, and 600 pages, and in the context of this conversation, there's like certain things that Elon Musk succeeded in, and like probably like I don't know, one of the greatest inventors like ever of Tesla, like SpaceX, Neuralink, and then he's like buying Twitter, and then now he's doing the Doge thing. There's so many things that he's doing, and he just like ruthlessly went after all this stuff. But then when you read that book, it's like basically everything else that you discuss like just fell by the wayside, and the marriages and the time and the mental health and the physical health and all of it. And so there was like a sacrifice in terms of all those other things because time is finite. And like we only have so much energy that we could dedicate to things. And then we have to decide which thing that we're actually going to dedicate our time to. And so I think that's really interesting. If people are listening and they're thinking like, let's just say that at the first level, and they're saying like, I don't have enough in my life because I can't pay the bills, or I'm just like struggling to get by. What would you say? Like, what would you say to those people if that's their mindset?
I think the first step, if you are stuck in that hole, is to figure out ruthlessly how to create more of a gap between the cash inflows that you are generating and the cash outflows on a monthly basis. That's all you need to think about if you're at that level, is how can I increase my income slightly on the back of whatever new skills that I can build or whatever more work that I can do. That is not going to be fun, by the way. This is not like getting out of that early part. There's nothing fun about this. This is like a real challenge. You're going to have to be trading time very much for making more money in those early stages. It means you're going to sacrifice time with friends, time with family, all of these other things to try to get out of this rut. That is about building skills that you can leverage for income, take the time and the skills and deploy that to make more money, and then ruthlessly eliminate unnecessary expenses. And I really mean ruthlessly, because the entire point here is that you're creating a gap that is going to grow between the inflows and outflows that you can put away into creating a pool of cash that can sit, that's a safety net. And then after you get probably 6 months of safety net, you can start thinking about investing. But everything needs to be about like sacrificing fun and time in order to create more of a gap so that you can get from paycheck to paycheck to like now you're like a month out. And that's huge progress. If you're going from like bi-weekly paycheck to paycheck to now you feel comfortable for a month, incredible progress. And you should feel really proud of making that transition, because that momentum then builds into having 2 months, builds into having 3 months. And all of a sudden you start to have this spiral. It's not dissimilar, frankly, from like what Dave Ramsey has been saying for 30 years about the debt snowball, paying off debt, the way that he thinks about that, because it's the starting small and you build the momentum that allows you to get towards financial freedom. And I think that's the case.
Yeah. And I really love the idea of there being seasons to your life, which is one idea you talk about that really struck me, in the sense that someone could just like deeply resent the season that they're in. And like, I don't want to be in the season. I want to be somewhere else. And then, or even the demands of that season. And it doesn't just relate to finances. I mean, someone who just has a newborn, right? Your life completely changes. Mm-hmm. And now you're in the season where like you have to care for this thing. And it's like completely demanding all of your time. And so life completely switches. And then you have this concept, which I thought was really cool, of like a dimmer. Mm-hmm. Which was really cool. Can you share about that? Because I think that like if you're spending all your time, like I'm working to get past this like living paycheck to paycheck thing, and you feel like you have to put time or social on the back burner, that doesn't mean that you can't go back to those things at a later point.
Yeah. So the idea is that traditional wisdom has told you that these different areas of your life exist on-off switches. That if you are focused on financial wealth building, all of the other areas have to be turned off. You're going to be leaning into your business, your career, whatever it is, and like your social life, your health, your purpose, all of the other things just get switched off, and you're going to be leaning into this one thing. And the challenge with that mentality and that mindset is that for a lot of these areas, if you turn them off and if they stay off for an extended period of time, you cannot turn them back on, or it is very difficult to.
Yeah.
We use the word later all the time with all of these different areas of life. We say like, oh, I'll spend more time with my kids later, or I'll focus on my health later, or I'll spend more time with my partner, spouse later. And later just becomes another word for never, because those things are not going to exist in the same way later. Mm-hmm. Your kids are not going to be 5 years old later. Your health won't be there for you later if you're not investing in it now. And so the important mindset shift here is to view all of these areas of your life as existing on a dimmer switch, which allows you to say, yes, one of them is turned way up. I am leaning into my financial wealth building right now. I'm in my 20s, early 30s. I'm leaning into that. But I'm not going to turn off the areas the other areas, they're just going to be turned down low, which means I can still do the one tiny action for those things every single day that is going to compound positively. The idea being anything above zero compounds. Anything above zero compounds. Sending the one text message to the friend when you're thinking about them is better than doing nothing. Going for the 15-minute walk is better than doing nothing. Doing those tiny things daily stacks and compounds. But the problem for most ambitious people is that we allow optimal to get in the way of beneficial. So we tell ourselves, oh, I don't have an hour to work out. I'm just not going to do anything today. I don't have 2 hours for deep work. I'm just not going to work. And that is allowing optimal to get in the way of beneficial. What we need to do is have that anything above zero compounds mindset. We need to have the dimmer switch mindset to say, I can turn down these areas, but still keep stacking tiny wins that are going to progress me in the right direction.
Yeah, that's really good. So when it comes to back on the idea of like the defining enough, Simon Sinek, he obviously originally became famous in 2008 for his whole philosophy around starting with why. And I'm sure you're familiar with this, but the golden circle diagram, and he was talking about how most companies know what they do and how they do it, but they don't know why they do it. And so, when I was thinking about defining enough and even the purpose that like money fulfills in your life, I would think that the same concept kind of applies, kind of what you were alluding to earlier, is that like, why do I need this amount of money? And so what are your thoughts of that on that front?
I think it's true. I think the that is really what the idea of clearly envisioning the life should do. It's like, why does this number matter to me? It's the first question I ask when I ask a friend, like, what are they driving towards? They'll say a number. Like, okay, but why? What is the life that number actually enables? Because usually what happens is they say a number, then they describe the life, and it turns out that life is actually enabled by a way lower number than they think. And that's an interesting nuance that you actually need to learn, is like, oh, I actually don't need $10 million to live the life that I think that I want to live and that I want to build towards. And I just think, I honestly, like, I come back over and over again to that parable that I share in the book of the banker and the fisherman, because I think it's the best articulation of this concept of enough. It's like, if you'll allow me to tell it, basically, an investment banker goes down to this Mexican fishing village, and he's walking along the dock, and he comes across this old fishing boat, and there's a fisherman who's caught a few fish. And he says, how long did it take you to catch those fish? The fisherman says, only a little while. And the banker says, why didn't you fish for longer? The fisherman says, well, I have everything I need. In the morning, I fish for a little while, then I go home, I have lunch with my wife, then I take a nap, then in the evening, I go into town, I play music, laugh, and dance with my friends. And the banker's like, you got this all wrong. Here's what you got to do. You got to fish for longer so you can catch more fish. Then you can buy a second boat. Then that boat will fish, and then you'll get a third boat, a fourth boat, a fifth boat. You'll create a whole fishing enterprise. You move to the big city. You take your company public, and you'll make millions. And the fisherman says, and then what? And the banker says, and then what? Then you can retire to a small fishing town. You can fish for a little while in the morning. Then you can go home, have lunch with your wife. Then you can take a nap. And then in the evening, you can play music, drink wine, and dance with your friends. And the fisherman just smiles and walks off into the distance. And the common interpretation of that story is to say that the banker is wrong and the fisherman is right. But I actually think it's more nuanced than that. They have a fundamentally different view of what enough looks like. The banker may define enough as going and building something big, going and building something that is his purpose. He wants to go and create jobs, go and create wealth, go and do this big thing. The fisherman is already living his enough life. So for the banker to apply his map of reality to the fisherman's terrain makes no sense. And similarly, and vice versa, it doesn't make sense for the fisherman to tell the banker how to live his life. That is what we're doing when we allow other people to give us our definition of what our life should look like. We're taking someone else's map of reality and applying it to our own. Defining what you want your life to actually look like is the antidote to that entire thing.
Yeah, one study that really stuck out to me that you cited was that really puts this into perspective was the 2018 Harvard study from Michael Norton. It was just kind of mind blowing. Like, can you share about that? Because this idea of enough being like a moving target and being influenced by other people, I think really comes into contextualize with the story and study.
This Harvard Business School professor named Michael Norton did this study where he went and asked a bunch of high net worth individuals, people worth anywhere from $1 million on through 100 million plus, how happy they were on a scale of 1 to 10. And then he asked them, how much more money would you need to be at a 10? And across the board, whether the people were worth $1 million or 100 million plus, all of them said 2 to 3 times as much as they currently have. It makes no sense. You would think that there would be some level where you would just be at the 10, you would just be happy, but it doesn't exist because we all naturally reset to say we need 2 to 3 times as much. I went and anecdotally asked around to a bunch of my friends who I consider successful and found the exact same thing. All of them just create this new inflated level of what they actually need in order to be happy. We just reset. It's not the money that is going to create that incremental happiness at that point.
Well, why do you think that is, though? Why do you think people keep raising the number, even at those levels? Just, I mean, I read it. I was like, how, like, this guy's worth like $100 million. Why is he saying like 300 million?
I think one of the reasons structurally is that when you are worth $100 million, you start spending time with a lot of people who are worth 200, 300, 400, 500, and you start comparing yourself to a bunch of people that are worth that. And so you start saying like, well, I'm actually the poor friend now among these people. I need that in order to be happy. The billionaire says, well, at 10 billion, you can afford the big mega yacht, not this one that I'm on. And that's the lesson. It's what I say. There's always going to be a bigger boat. It's like that idea. There's always going to be something that's bigger. So unless you are centering your happiness on who you are and what you are actually doing, grounding yourself in your purpose or something else, you're just going to be chasing whatever more the world tells you you should want.
Yeah, there was a story in there about a yacht as well, wasn't there?
Yeah.
Was it your friend?
A friend, yeah.
Yeah, a friend that bought a yacht and then,
Yeah, a friend of mine sold his company and made, $100 million. And he took a bunch of friends on a yacht trip. He rented a yacht for a week and he was taking a bunch of friends to celebrate this exit, family and friends, this big celebration. They all got there to go get on this yacht and they're on the dock about to get on. And one of his friends is walking up and my friend's all excited. And the guy walks up and is like, wow, look at that yacht over there. I wonder who's on that one. He pointed to this like way bigger yacht that was on the other mooring. And in that moment, all of my friend's enjoyment and happiness at this experience that he was creating for his friends was destroyed. It was obliterated by this comparison. And the lesson there was exactly that. There's always going to be a bigger boat. Always going to be a bigger boat in life. So if you are centering your happiness on this thing, you are going to be sorely disappointed.
That's really good.
Viktor Frankl said, happiness cannot be pursued, it must ensue. And I think that's very true. It's a perfect articulation of this idea that it has to be from the internal. It cannot be something that you are chasing externally.
Yeah. So, I mean, if we're going to think about our lives holistically, what do you think the purpose of money is?
The purpose of money is a tool for all of these other things. In the early days, money is a tool for reducing all of the fundamental burdens and stresses that we talked about on that early part of the curve. Beyond that, if you think of it in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that's sort of a way to think about this, is to say that beyond those early stages where you are needing to meet those basic needs, you start using money as a tool to acquire, to build these other types of wealth. And it is a very effective tool if you think of it that way. One of the most common things people say about money is they say, well, money is freedom. That's not true. Money is not freedom. Money, well used, can help you get free. But it's not just money equals freedom. I have plenty of friends who make astronomical amounts of money that are not free. They work 80, 90, 100 hours a week for someone else at a hedge fund, making $10 million a year, more money than you could ever know what to do with, but they're not free. The money doesn't equal freedom. Well-used money, well-intentioned money can be a tool for acquiring freedom. So that's the point. With all of these areas, the money well-used and well-designed, well thought of, can be used as a tool to build these other areas. You can invest in ways that allow you to work towards more freedom. You can create experiences for social wealth with people. You can have the freedom to search for your purpose, to find things that you really care about spending time on, to grow. You can invest in your health in certain ways that will really help you. All of these other areas can be created and expanded upon, invested in by using money as a tool once you've gotten past that early stage.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people have tried to figure out the whole money and freedom thing because, I mean, wouldn't money in some senses bring autonomy? I mean, control was another idea that you had discussed about like the level of control that you feel that you have over your life, or that your life is being dictated on your own terms versus it being dictated on somebody else's terms. And if you are not as wealthy and you feel like I don't know, you feel like you're a slave to your job or your boss or your rent or whatever, it feels like an aspect of control would be a factor there.
I think it's hard to understand until you've seen it live with people. But the amount of friends that I have that make astronomical amounts of money, but who are anti-free, is mind blowing to me. I have a dear friend who probably makes about $10 million a year working at a big company, and cannot leave the job, even though he hates it, because his entire lifestyle is built around making $10 million a year. And he wants to go start something else, build his own company, but he cannot get off the IV drip of the annual comp that he makes at this company. And their entire life is built around, they probably spend $10 million a year. I don't know how you do that, but they do. And the whole life, right? It's like, you live in a big city, private school, charter flights, like you can find a way to spend that much money. And it's crazy to think, but on the surface, like, yes, he could say, well, I could do all of these things, but he's not really free in that way because he has to stay doing something that he doesn't like to continue to create the life that they've built for themselves. That's not free. And so that is why I really just think there's a big difference between money that is used to create freedom, that is well designed and thoughtfully designed in order to create a free life, versus just money and thinking that one day you're going to wake up and magically be free.
Yeah. I think that's really good. Yeah. I mean, we had Arthur Brooks on our podcast last year, obviously collaborated with him on one of the chapters in there. And this is a paraphrase, not exactly what he said, but it was something along the lines of like, money is best at work when it serves what he defined as the 4 pillars of happiness, which is family, faith, friendship, and meaningful work, where you're kind of expressing your love to humanity. And so in terms of the resourcefulness of money, like, do you have any reflections on that in terms of like the point of money being something that serves something greater?
Mm-hmm. I do think that the happiest people I know act in the service of others. It's something beyond the self that they are focused on. I think Arthur has done a lot of great work on talking about this, that happy people in general are not focused on themselves. They're focused on things outside themselves, the world, if you will. And that world could be their family and their, circle, the like very close circle, or it could be the broader world at some point. And I think you see this actually reflected if you think about the kind of trajectory that some astronomically wealthy people have taken in their lives, where like once they have reached this level of astronomical wealth, they are trying to create an interplanetary species, or they're trying to save humanity from poverty, like do these astronomical at the world scale things in the service of others, because they're searching for that that feeling that they're creating value for other people. I have over and over again seen that the best uses of money are to create these other types of wealth. People that chase money for the sake of money are almost always miserable.
Yeah.
People that chase more. So there's an important distinction here, because over and over again, we talk about this idea of more, like, more is bad. I don't want to keep chasing more. If you are chasing more, but it's grounded in your purpose, that is a good thing. If you're chasing more money for the sake of more money, you will end up miserable. But if you are trying to go and build something meaningful, and you're saying like, well, I want to build this company bigger. I want to go create more jobs. I want to go create something more meaningful. It's because that's my purpose. I want to go build something big. That's great. And you will continue to find enjoyment and drive in that pursuit. But the chase for money for the sake of money itself is the one that leads people off the cliff.
Yeah, I think that's such a rich insight. And something that people, I mean, it ties back into the bot exercise. In some sense, it's about like, why am I doing this? Why am I buying this? And I mean, and even going back to Elon, what you were talking about is like, I feel like there's so much that we stand to lose. And when we define enough as at a certain point, or even when we're pursuing money for the sake of money, or even success. And so like, you're making an active decision of like, I'm going to basically crucify all these other things in my life out of this like one pursuit. And the idea of I'm going to mess up this word, Pyrrhic victory, I thought was really interesting in the sense of a victory won at such a steep cost that it feels like a loss. And so like, I'm going to build this company, I'm going to do this thing, but I'm going to have like terrible mental health. My physical health is going to be shredded, and my social life, and just wasting time itself. And so can you explain that concept about like the Pyrrhic victory?
King Pyrrhus was this ancient historical figure who got called into battle by a local ally and goes into battle, and it's against the Roman Republic. And he kind of is running this small army, ragtag, and he fights this battle and he beats back these Roman invaders, but at an enormous cost to his army. He loses a bunch of his his best generals. And the idea is that he won a victory, but it was at such a steep cost to his army that it might as well have been a defeat. It effectively rendered his army and his kingdom useless in the future. His name lives on in this term, the Pyrrhic victory, which is the victory won at such a steep cost, it might as well have been a defeat. It is the battle won, but the war lost, if you will. The Pyrrhic victory is what we are all trying to avoid in life. It is winning the one battle of making a bunch of money, but losing the much bigger picture war of trying to build a fulfilling and happy existence as a human being. And it's unfortunately what a lot of us are marching towards if our focus is so narrowly on money. Mm-hmm. And I experienced that in my own life. For the first 7 years of my career, I was working in the world of finance. I was so narrowly focused every year, more and more so, on money being the path to me living a good life, to feeling good as a human being. And every year, as I started marching towards that, I lost sight of all of the other things. I got these blinders on over and over again that got closer and closer in, that allowed me to focus on the one thing, but started to see deterioration in all of the other things. My relationships started to suffer. I was drinking 6-7 nights a week. My mental health was hurting. All of these other areas of my life were starting to suffer, while on the surface, it looked like I was winning the one game. The one thing that we measure, I was doing great in that one thing. And if I hadn't stopped, I would have run off that well-known cliff that so many people do. I would have won the battle, but lost the much bigger picture war. And so what this is all about is, if we're trying to win the war, we need to measure for the war. We can't just measure for the battle, because then you might win it, but lose the war. Mm-hmm. We need to measure for the bigger picture of what we're trying to do in our lives.
Yeah, I think important to that, the idea of, in terms of how we design our lives, like anti-goals. Mm-hmm. Can you explain that?
The concept of anti-goals is a derivative off of a famous Charlie Munger quote, which is, "All I want to know is where I'm going to die, so I'll never go there." The concept is like, create guardrails around the path that you are walking. If I know that my goal that I'm setting for myself is the summit of the mountain, anti-goals are the things that I'm not willing to sacrifice in the pursuit of that summit. So I want to become CEO of this company, but my anti-goal might be spending 300 nights out of the year away from my family. And another one might be allowing my health to go to hell. Mm-hmm. I want to accomplish the goal of becoming CEO, but not if it means those things coming true. Not if it means those anti-goals becoming real. It's so important to have goals with anti-goals attached to them so that you can avoid the Pyrrhic victory, so that you can avoid achieving the one thing at the expense of these other important things. And it goes back to exactly what you were articulating. Elon Musk, as an example, he has accomplished extraordinary world-changing things at the expense of other things in his life. That is not to say he is wrong and I am right. It is to say that you should get to choose. You should not have to be forced to be told that living a meaningful life is doing this, thing that he is doing. You get to decide what you care about and what you want to build your life around. And that's really what this is all about. It's about you getting to choose what your life looks like. You getting to identify the mountains that you actually care to be on, the stories that you actually want to write for yourself, rather than living by default according to the ones that have been handed to you.
Yeah, and I think the key insider lesson there is there's like an active negotiation that's happening when you look at your life holistically like that, versus a lot of people might get out of college, get in a career path, and be like, okay, I'm just going to, like you're saying with yourself, I'm just going to pursue money and success at all costs, without thinking about your life holistically and like, what are the outcomes that I don't want to happen? And it's kind of like just something that probably just happens over time for some people. It's like you didn't actively think, well, I want my marriage to go down the crapper, like just at the beginning of when you set out on this path, but it just kind of happened because it wasn't something that you were actively thinking about.
It's the boiling frog metaphor.
Yeah.
No one wakes up and says that they want to screw their life up today. You just slowly take tiny actions that you wake up a year from now and your life is screwed up. Yeah. No one says they want to ruin their life on a single day, right? Like it just doesn't happen. It's the boiling frog is the metaphor of if a frog jumps into a pot of boiling water, it'll immediately jump out. But if you put a frog into a pot of water and start slowly bringing it to a boil, it'll stay in until it dies.
Yeah.
And that boiling frog is what a lot of us go through when we're making slow, steady, negative decisions in our lives. It's the tiny little things that are slowly turning up the heat on our life until it's too late.
Yeah, and I mean, and it's not even like these big things. Like one story that stuck out was you were talking about the original Netflix CEO Mark Randolph and how his non-negotiable was like, I'm not going to miss date night with my wife at 5:00 on Tuesdays or whatever. And that was like a thing for him, like a ritual every single Tuesday. Not really that big of a cost, if you really want to call it. You're just setting aside time for this one action every single week, and you're choosing to prioritize that. But when you get swept up and you don't have enough time in your life, and you feel like you're always behind, and then you're not thinking about these anti-goals, it's very easy to just years to go by, and just you're not even. That's the farthest thing for your mind, setting a goal or a time for your marriage like that. So
yeah, and you need to have those things front and center in your mind. That is an important bigger picture concept with all of this. Is it's very easy to hear these ideas. They shine a light of wisdom on your path. You nod your head, you're like, that makes tons of sense, I get it. And then you go back living the same way you were before. Most of us do that. We gather the information and then we do nothing with it. There's this enormous gap between the information that we gather and then the action that we take on it. The important piece here is whatever one concept you want to go act on, put it front and center in your life. Like that idea of the never missing a 5 p.m. dinner, it was identity defining for the type of person that he was. It was much more important than the one dinner, than any one date that he went on. It was who he was as a human being. I have my version of that, which is that I will coach my son's sports teams. I call it a life raiser in the book. And when I walk through it, it's the idea that I have an identity defined around this way that I show up in the world, that I'm going to be the type of father, the type of husband, the type of community member, the type of team member who coaches his son's sports teams. That is my priority. And that is how I act in service of others. It's how I show up. It's that's what matters to me. Having that in front of me, like having a note card or something that says that on it, is a powerful trigger for whatever chaos starts to come into my life, I can look at it and say to myself, what does the type of person who coaches his son's sports teams do in this situation? I probably don't chase money at the cost of my character or integrity. I probably don't hide from problems with my family. I probably don't, sacrifice time with them in order to chase an incremental dollar. It means something about who I am, but I need to see it so that in those moments, it's front of my mind rather than being something that's a distant concept in the back.
Yeah, that's really good. One thing I want to ask you about, as in terms of like designing your life and defining enough, you had mentioned that a bit earlier that there wasn't like a one size fits all approach to this, but it does seem like there are certain principles where if I go down this path, it's probably not going to lead to a good destination. And for example, let's just say I want to buy a sports car or expensive handbag because I feel like that's going to bring me permanent happiness. I would imagine that is quite different mindset than I want to have a second house because I want to host and I really value like community and building shared experiences. So like, what are your thoughts along that front in terms of the things that we desire and our mindset around the happiness that that's going to bring us?
I would generally say that we need to ask ourselves the question of how much of our lives are we living for the benefit of others, meaning buying the handbag to try to impress other people versus buying the handbag because you love the design and the way that it makes you feel holding it and carrying it. There's a big difference between the two. Huge difference between the person who buys the fancy watch because he wants to post a picture on Instagram versus the person who buys the watch because they're obsessed with watch engineering and they really want to understand it. It's a collection. They're going to pass it down to their son. It means something to them. Big difference in the way that is going to manifest in your own happiness and in your own utility in your life. Same thing with the car lover who actually just loves driving the car on the weekend and taking it through the mountain roads versus having people in town see them in the fancy car. Huge difference. One is actually going to create lasting utility. The other one is just going to create this feeling of never enough because you're going to get the car and then I guarantee you one of your neighbors is going to get a nicer one and you're going to just dread this car. You're going to complain about it, that it's not enough. And so I think that over and over again, we need to ask ourselves that question of the things that I am chasing, the things that I desire, are they lasting and real, or are they just this thing that I am doing to try to impress for the benefit of other people?
Yeah.
The respect and admiration that you are looking for, the real purpose of status is to have that lasting respect and admiration from your peers. It cannot be bought. It has to be earned status. And that is through doing things over long periods of time, through delaying gratification to go and build real things. You don't, because you have money, you do not all of a sudden have the respect and admiration of your peers. People think that that's true. It's like, oh, if I have money, then people respect me. Well, then lottery winners would be the most respected people in the country. I have $1 billion. You just won the lottery. They're not respected. There's nothing wrong with them. But all of a sudden, the CEO of a bunch of big companies.
How it happened, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It matters how you got it. It matters whether you built something of value to earn that money. It's the same thing with a body, right? Like, that is why there are all these questions now about Ozempic. It's like, oh, can you feel as proud about the body that you built if you took a drug or plastic surgery to get that versus you earned it through hundreds of hard workouts and bland meals? Relationships. Like, I mean, the body one is a great example because I would argue that a healthy, fit physique is a better status flex than a Rolex.
Yeah.
Because it took hundreds of hours. It took really hard work over a long period of time versus you just went into a store and bought something. And so the earned status test that I offer in the book is exactly this, to say, could the richest person in the world get this thing that I want by tomorrow? If the answer is yes, it is not earned status. Because if they can just buy it overnight, it's not something that has to be earned. It's something that can just be bought. So you want to chase things in life where you are on an even playing field with Elon Musk. Elon Musk cannot get a six-pack any faster than you. He can have he can have a private chef, he could have a personal trainer, but they can't eat the food for him. They can't do the workout for him. Both of you guys have to do the hard work to go and get that thing. So those are the things that you want to chase because that's what's actually going to confer that lasting respect and admiration and what's going to create that lasting, durable happiness.
Yeah, I think there's a real virtue there. I haven't really heard it put in those terms before because a lot of things that I had originally mentioned, like there's a demonization when it comes to anything material, right? So let's just say, you're talking about the reason why. I mean, I have friends that, for example, are into fashion, and so that not necessarily has to be like a vain thing, but I think when you thinking about it in terms of approval and the kind of trying to buy a status thing from another human being, it completely changes the conversation because if I'm dressing in a particular way because I really love fashion and I'm really into that and that's just who I am as a person, like I guess that could in some senses like bring some sort of happiness. Or maybe you have an extremely expensive fetish for sports cars, but there's a reason why like you go to all the sports car shows and you're like really into that type of thing versus like I'm just like visualizing in my head how everybody's going to look at me when I go down the street in a Ferrari. And so I think that that's like a really kind of important insight of like determining the internal motivators that people have when they go about these things.
I mean, generally speaking, the most successful people very rarely flaunt their success in your face because they don't have to. Like having a bright blue Lamborghini is sort of mid. Right? It's like it's like one of those midwit memes where like the richest person in the world drives like a Tesla Model S. It's like nice car, don't get me wrong, but it's not flashy. It looks the same as every other Tesla. The like semi-rich person that wants you to stare at them is the one that drives the bright blue Lamborghini. Again, if they love cars, they love doing that. If it makes them happy, by all means, go get your damn car. I'm super happy for you that you've had the success to do that. But it's a very clear signal that, I don't think you will find Bill Gates driving around a bright blue Lamborghini or Tim Cook driving around a bright blue Lamborghini, because they don't need to tell you how successful they are, because because they earned it in whatever way, whatever thing that they built. And we need to ask ourselves that over and over again of like, generally speaking, the flashy, flaunty success, the Rolex, the private jet picture, the fancy car, it's impressing poor people. It's not impressing rich people, but you think it's going to get you the respect and admiration of like your set of people. It's not, right? Like when people post that kind of stuff on social media, the reason they're posting that usually is because they're selling a course to someone that doesn't have any money.
Oh yeah, I've seen that.
All of these like gurus on social media telling you how to get rich. They take a picture in front of the private jet being like, look how, if you want to get rich like me, buy my course. And by the way, I got rich like this by selling you a course, not by doing the thing that I'm trying to supposedly teach you in the course.
Yeah, I feel like you're literally describing Andrew Tate.
I don't know him personally, but
no, just like
it.
just the idea of just kind of male influencers in today's space that are selling a particular lifestyle.
I mean, I could. I don't know who Andrew Tate in particular, but I think there is a rather terrible trend of painting masculinity as being equivalent to misogyny and like rather disgusting toxic behavior. And I think it's an awful thing, because there are a lot of men who feel lost, who are attracted to the idea of someone giving them a solution. And if that solution that gets the most clicks, that is getting the most views and getting the most shares, is a way of living that is fundamentally not a moral way of living, I think that is a really sad thing for the future of what society looks like. And I think we need to offer an alternative.
Yeah, and I think what that can create in some senses is like, I mean, we've been talking about goals and defining what enough is like for you. And I think that it creates a widening gap of like where I am and what this thing that someone's selling me is, in terms of flashy cars or expensive lifestyle, whatever. And so I'd imagine for some people, it probably creates a sense of just resentment in their own life, and stirs up like a lack of contentment in what they have, and the fact that like I just feel like I'm so far from where I'm at. And so when you're setting goals in your life, how important do you think it is to be realistic about what it is that we're setting out, what we want a year to look like, 5 years, 10 years to look like? I mean, it doesn't just have to apply to money, but it can apply to all these things. In terms of like, for example, if you're coming out of college and you're like, okay, I want to be a billionaire in like 2 years, like that's more than likely not going to happen. So like, I feel like the goals probably need to be realistic in some sort of sense.
Yeah, I think the goals need to be internal, meaning they need to be yours, not things that you've just been told you should care about. And I think they need to be within your control, in the sense that they are not a byproduct of something else. So I'll give you an example of that, which is a lot of people ask me, they'll come to me and say, I want to build a personal brand. What should I do? That is such a weird way of articulating what you are trying to do. Like, no, I never once in my entire journey of the last 5 years of writing and sharing things that has culminated in this book said, I am trying to build a personal brand. A personal brand is a byproduct of creating an enormous amount of value for people, which engenders trust with those people, which creates a brand around who you are. The brand is never the goal. The goal was to create value for people, and the brand was a byproduct or result. Same exact thing applies to money. You are not trying to become a millionaire. You are not trying to be rich. You are trying to create an enormous amount of value for other people, and you will receive value in return. I guarantee if you go and create tens of millions of dollars of value for people around you, you will become a millionaire. It will just happen. It'll be a natural byproduct of the fact that you are creating tens of millions of dollars of value. The only way anyone in history has ever made a lot of money is by creating an enormous amount of value and then capturing a small percentage of that over time. Elon Musk may become a trillionaire someday. It is going to be because he creates trillions of dollars of value for other people, and he is going to capture a portion of that along the way. It is the exact same principle for you in your life. So when you start out, make sure you're focusing on the right thing that you can actually control, which is the value that you can create. You'll make money on the back of the value that you can create for other people.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of like the three pillars that you outlined for specifically for financial wealth, I thought it was so important with the first one, with the income generation. It isn't normally the first thing that people talks about that they speak about when it comes to wealth generation in terms of like the value that you're putting out and the skill sets that you're building. And I think that when you think in those terms, like it's very helpful because you're thinking more meta about your life, and then the meta skills that you're building in your life, and they could be multidimensional in terms of, I graduated in college in, I don't know, 2011 now, with a degree in marketing, and marketing like looked very different in 2011 than it does now. And in 2016, I was teaching at like a digital marketing boot camp, and it's just like there are these changing in technologies and the mediums and social media, and even what's popular now and what's working now is not the same as 2016. But there are like these skills, these meta skills that kind of transcend time, that even if you go back 30 years ago, they were still useful back then. And so can you talk about that in terms of the three pillars for wealth and how building a skill set applies into building income?
Yeah. So income generation is the first pillar. And as you said, I think people massively overcomplicate what it means to make money, and how you do it. So what you get is a whole bunch of people saying like, well, I don't know how to make money. All making money comes down to is basically three little things, which is identify problems, create solutions, and then scale those solutions. That's all that making money is. So anytime you're trying to make money or trying to figure out how to make more money, you need to be working on one of those three things. You need to be working on identifying problems, you need to be working on creating solutions, or you need to be working on scaling those solutions. If you're doing anything else, you're wasting your time.
What's an example of that?
Identify a problem that your boss has. If you work in a 9-to-5 job, go around for a week with a notepad and just think about every single time your boss is clearly experiencing some sort of pain point. If you can be the type of employee, as a junior employee especially, who just is looking around for problems, and then you're actually coming with a solution to those problems, you're going to be in the top 10% of every single company you ever work for. Because the reality is that most people just aren't going to do that. Most people think that their job description is what they're supposed to do and that they're going to get their annual pay raise for just doing the job description. That's fine if you want to get your annual inflation pay raise every single year. If you want to do better than that, you have to do more than what your job description says. That's the reality of the marketplace and how capitalism works. All that comes down to is identify problems that people are experiencing, create a solution to those problems. And if you can scale that solution, even better, you'll get handsomely rewarded for doing that.
What would you like for, okay, so that would be like one example. Someone's kind of working their way up, maybe the corporate ladder. What would be like another example for somebody that, I don't know, is in different career, entrepreneur or something like that?
If you're an entrepreneur, the first thing I would do if you're trying to figure out a business idea is do that same exercise, but for your own life. So take a piece of paper, carry around a notepad with you for a week. Note down every single time you have any sort of like experience that you would say is like a 6 out of 10 or below. With anything, doesn't matter. Don't try to like set a bar to being like, oh, it has to be a business idea. Just mark down every pain point or friction that you experience during your week, whatever it is. After that, you can zoom out and look at the list and say like, here are a whole bunch of problems that I just experienced in my own life. Are there skills that I have or could build to solve any of those? Those could be simple things, by the way. Like it could be, picking up packages for people who are out of town for periods of time. And you're going to then, you're going to take them, store them safely, and then bring them back to their house on the date. You could charge money for that. That could be a college side hustle and you could make some money for it. It could be storing stuff for people during the summer. Whatever the thing is that you are experiencing, use that to identify problems. Then you can start brainstorming, coming up with solutions. And then you can think about how to scale those, how you reach more people to scale that solution that you created.
What are like the meta skills then you would, because you outlined, I think, 5 or 6 in the book. What are the meta skills that people should be thinking about when it comes to this?
I think the two most important meta skills I would think about for anyone would be storytelling and sales. And the two sort of go hand in hand. Storytelling, at the end of the day, is the skill that the most successful people in the world have. The CEOs of the biggest companies in the world are not the smartest people in their organizations. They are the best storytellers. They have an insane capacity to take a whole bunch of disparate data in on one side and come out with a nice, clean, neat narrative story on the other side. Storytelling as a skill and as a muscle can be built. It's not something you are born with or not born with. What it takes is reps. And what it takes is identifying each of those reps, identifying what is working and what isn't. So when I'm talking to you, when we're having this conversation, we're talking about things, I'm noticing how you're reacting to the way that I'm articulating different ideas. When your eyes light up, when I saw you lean in, when I saw you a little confused, all of those things are data points that I can now take to refine my storytelling around that concept, whatever it was. You need to start doing that in your own life. As you tell stories in whatever arena that you are in, notice what's working and what isn't to refine those stories that you tell. You'll become a better storyteller. Sales is everything in life. You are fundamentally selling in anything that you do. Whether you are a salesperson at a company or not, you are selling. If you're trying to meet a partner, spouse, that is selling yourself to someone else. When you're trying to get promoted at work, you are selling yourself to your bosses. When you are trying to get your team on board for the project that you think that you should be working on, you're selling the idea to those people. You're selling to customers. All of these things are sales. And sales is a skill that has become something that people, it has a connotation of being sleazy. It's like the sell me this pen thing from the Wolf of Wall Street, when the reality is sales is everything.
Yeah, no, I've totally learned that in my own life. I mean, there was a time out of college that I was actually in literal sales where I was like selling something, but then those two skills specifically when it comes to sales and storytelling, I just have felt in building this company over the past 7 years, have just come over and over and over again. Just even in little moments, even sending an email, even in talking to somebody about an idea. It's like, I think it was Sam Altman from OpenAI. I read a tweet from him once. He was talking about how if you can take a really big complex idea and disseminate it down into like a few sentences, like those are the things that like change the world. And so there's certain fields, for example. I don't know, Andrew Huberman, for example. Like there's so many scientists that are in the lab doing the work all the time. And what somebody like him has done is like he's taken all of that and now he's putting it out into the world in a way that people can understand. And so that's just like all storytelling. I mean, they're both doing the same thing. They're both in the lab. They're both looking at the data, but the ability to actually then go out into the world and tell a story around it has now proved to be immensely valuable from a media perspective for him. And so I think it's so interesting.
It is very interesting. And the way that I would think about it, just like the simple mental model that I have for storytelling that I think anyone can use is with any endeavor, anything that you're working on, what you're trying to do is basically create a very clear picture around three things. The world today, which is dark and stormy and bad. The future that you envision, which is beautiful, sunny, and nice. And then how the thing that you are offering is going to bridge the gap between those two worlds. You need to paint the picture for those three things very clearly and so that it's so clear visual in the other person's mind. If you can do that, people will give you whatever money you want. You'll get all of the investors. People will promote you at work. All of those things will work out if you can just create a clear vision of those three things.
Yeah, that's really good. How would you, with someone, I feel like a lot of younger people especially struggle with the income generation thing because of their sense of purpose, right? And so they can decide to go out and engage with a career that might be higher paying, that they feel like they're not getting so much purpose out of. They feel like they're pushing numbers all day long, or they take on a tremendous amount of risk and to pursue something that might be more meaningful and in the short term could be low paying. Or if they just go down that career path and it's just like a low paying career path just in general that they're going to engage with the rest of their life. How would you coach somebody in working through that type of dilemma?
The first thing you need to recognize is that your work does not have to be your purpose. You can dislike a job and still get a whole lot of value and utility out of it. That value and utility can be financial. It can also be skills or knowledge or experience or networks. I wouldn't say I intrinsically enjoyed my first job, but I got a tremendous amount out of it in the form of networks and money and experience and knowledge and wisdom and all these other things. I was trading money and I was getting those. And so I think that gets lost in the mix a lot with young people is they think that they have to love their job. You don't have to love your job. You can dislike your job and still get a lot out of it. And the articulation and I think the narrative that has really hurt is this whole like work smart versus work hard thing. People are like, no, I want to work smart. You can't work smart when you're starting your career.
Yeah.
You can't because you don't have any of the tools that you need in order to work smart. All you have when you start your career is time. You don't have knowledge, you don't have networks, you don't have money, you don't have experience, you don't have wisdom. You don't have any of those things. So what you need to do is work hard, meaning take that time and deploy it to earn knowledge, money, networks, wisdom, and experience. Once you have those things, then you can work smart because you can deploy those strategically into the opportunities that are going to drive the 10 or 100x outcomes. But you can't do the latter before you do the former. You have to work hard first and then smart later. And I think that gets lost in this whole discussion when people say like, well, I don't really like my job. It doesn't really matter when you're starting out. As long as you are actually acting in the service of that foundation building stuff, all of those things that you're trying to accumulate. If you're not enjoying it and you're not getting any of those things, that's a reason to leave and go and do something else. But if you are building some of those core foundation building items, then it could be in service of a much longer term goal that is really important.
Yeah, so it's like a stepping stone.
I really think your purpose in your 20s, frankly, is to build a foundation for your life. And I think you need to define your purpose that way because then there are a whole lot of things that you may not enjoy that are still in service of that purpose.
Yeah.
I also just think it's okay to not like your job. I mean, honestly, for more than 50% of people out there, they will never have a job that they like.
Like somebody they're sitting there for 40, 50 hours a week.
Yeah, but you can dislike the job and still find energy for it by connecting it to something bigger. I mean, like in the research for this book, I spent time with a man who works on an assembly line, puts together widgets 10 hours a day. He doesn't like his job. Nothing about that he likes, doing this monotonous task over and over again. But he connects it to his higher order purpose, which is to be the father that he never had to his boys. He is the provider for the family, takes that very seriously. So every day when he goes to work, he connects to that purpose. So he finds energy for work that he doesn't like because it's in service of something that he really matters to him, that he's able to do because of the work. And so if you can actually just zoom out a little bit, sometimes you can find energy doing something you don't like and actually feel that it is part of a bigger picture in your life.
Yeah, I think that's really rich. I mean, I think a lot of people could benefit from kind of a mind shift when it comes to looking at the work that they're doing in that way. Last two things I want to hit on the financial piece was the expense management piece of this entire equation obviously has become increasingly difficult, especially for millennials and Generation Z. I mean, I referenced the thing about cost of living and salaries have not gone up as much as inflation over the past 40 years. So cost of living is already difficult, but then spending habits are out of control probably at some level with millennials and Generation Z. And so what would your advice be there in terms of just managing your expenses and designing your life?
I would gamify the plan around expenses if you struggle with this. What I mean by that is make it a game that you're going to like set your budget, whether it's just yourself or if you have a partner, and you're trying to come as close to that as you can. Like truly make it into a game. You're like, oh, let's see how close to our number we can hit for this month. Because when you start doing those kind of things, it becomes like actually fun trying to hit this number that you've set out as your budget. And you start doing a better job when you make something fun that previously was like this annoying thing that existed. But you have to make it tangible, and there has to be a clear plan in place if you're going to stick to it. I mean, in my early years of my career, I was spending so much money on rent because I wanted to live close to the office because I knew that I was going to be working really long hours and getting there in those windows was important, that I had to be ridiculously judicious about other money that I was spending in order to not lose money every month. I was working in a high paying career, but it was like I had to really dial in what I was spending every month and really track it down to the dollar in order to make sure that I was still creating a gap that I could invest for the long term. And that became fun for me. It kind of became a thing that I was focused on. Eventually, you hope that you can graduate out of that. But in those years where it is important and you're trying to build that base, you're trying to create that safety net, whatever it might be, just gamify it.
I mean, you've done so much research for this book. Like, do you have a sense of what % of people like are actively kind of like budgeting and sticking to it? Like,
no, I think my best guess of a person that would know that off the top of their head would be Ramit Sethi, who has done incredible work with I Will Teach You to Be Rich, which was his first book, and now Money for Couples, his second book. I would guess it's very low. I think a lot of people have all the apps and the net worth tracking things and the different tools, but the number of people who actually have taken the time to like create, here's what we're spending every month. It doesn't need to be down to the dollar, but create some general sense. I mean, I do it with my business now, right? Like I want a general sense of what are our cash inflow lines and our cash outflows so that I have a rough idea in mind of like what's our run rate profitability.
Yeah. I mean, if I haven't been doing that I mean, we started doing that, I don't know, 8 years ago. And if I didn't have that spreadsheet, I mean, it would just be like so chaotic to me in terms of like, and it's like you set a number, but then like, it's almost like you need to set this additional bucket for just random shit that goes crazy. And it's just every single month. It's like, oh, they just sent me some random bill for some medical thing that I did like 8 months ago. And all of a sudden that's like coming in the mail. And it just seems like it happens every single month. And so then there's like
fringe costs.
Yeah.
You need that built into the budget. I mean, it is in the book, I talk about like, you need to have one of the expense lines needs to be the like miscellaneous things that do just come up in your life, because that used to stress me out a lot. I'd be like, well, that wedding that I went to, like that was a weird expense that just happened this one month. I'm like, okay, well, that weird expense keeps happening every single month in some way, shape, or form. There's some wedding, there's some weekend thing, there's something you have to buy a present for someone. And so you need to budget for those things in the same way that you think about these other areas.
Do you think investments are something that really applies to those level 2, 3, 4, 5 on that wealth chart that we were talking about? Or is there something that people can be doing even at like an early stage in terms of planning for the future investing?
I think that as soon as you have created a safety net rainy day fund that you feel comfortable with, that number is going to vary. I personally am more conservative. I like having about 12 months of cash sitting around. For some people, it's going to be 6 months. I personally think 3 months is getting tight. I think having 6 months the first thing you do is make sure that you have 6 months. After that, you should start investing whatever amount of money that you have, because the reality is that money invested early is much better than money invested late, the way compounding works. Compounding, the entire equation here is its returns to the power of time. Time is the exponent. So that's the thing you need to focus on, the amount of time that the money is invested in the market. So putting away $20 today, $100 today is better than zero. So starting the clock on your investments as soon as you can, that is the path to financial freedom.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've been talking so much about, income generation and expense management and a framework for approaching financial wealth. But I think, even if that stuff isn't where you want it to be or what your long-term goal is, the idea of what the meaning of the word wealth means was really contextualized in your book, in the sense that like money isn't everything when it comes to wealth. And it was really articulated and put into terms for me when it was just a simple question in your book of would you trade lives with Warren Buffett?
You get so many young people whose entire focus and obsession is on making money. And that is the entire picture that they have on a wealthy life is about money, on being rich. And you ask them this question, and I do this all the time. I say, would you trade lives with Warren Buffett? He's worth $130 billion. He has that money figured out. He flies around on a Boeing business jet. He's got houses all over the place. He gets to meet with anyone in the world. He reads and learns for a living. It sounds pretty great, but you wouldn't trade lives with him. No one listening to this probably would trade lives with him for one simple reason. He's 95 years old. There's no way you would agree to trade the amount of time you have left for the amount of time he does, even for $130 billion. It wouldn't make any sense. And on the flip side, he would give anything to be in your shoes today, to have the amount of time that you have left. So in asking that question and answering it, that time has quite literally incalculable value. And yet, on a daily basis, what are you really doing with it? Are you really taking advantage of the time that you have? Are you really treating it as your most precious asset? Or are you spending it scrolling on your phone, comparing yourself to other people, worrying about stupid stuff, stressing about the future, doing all of these random things that are allowing that most precious asset to just flitter away?
I think the idea of that money isn't everything is really articulating that, because it's not even just about time, but with Warren Buffett, it's also about like your youth. And even if you're in your 30s or 40s or even in your 50s, right, you have this ability to exercise at a certain level, to be in tip-top shape, right? And so just the process of aging itself, why do you feel like we lose sight of that as a culture, rather that it's like you look at somebody who has so much money and be like, well, I'm not where they are. But then it's like we don't counter those thoughts with, but I have so much time on my side right now. Or even if I have my physical health, it's just like another thing.
I think when you're young, you feel immortal. And time is one of those things that you effectively think about none. Like if you were to map a chart of the amount of thought that you give to time, it would basically be zero until the very end, when it would be the only thing that you think about when it's too late, like when you're about to die. There might be like little blips when you lose someone in your family, or when there's something that happens that's the spike, and then it goes back down to you don't think about it at all. And we need to change that. I mean, we need to measure our time in a very real and clear way. It's why Memento Mori, those calendars that track the weeks of your life, have become so popular, because it forces you to, on a daily or weekly basis, visually see how much of your time is past and how much you have remaining, so that you can appreciate all those little dots, which each represent a week, and recognize that if you just let a week pass you by, it's a week you're never going to get back. And the actual articulation of this idea in the form of moments that you have with people that you love is the realization that changed my life. It was the idea that I didn't have that many more moments with my parents, that the amount of time that you have left with the people you care about most in the world is much more finite than you ever care to admit. And when you realize that, when you really start to internalize that fact, you start living differently. Because you start to realize that you are actually in control of that more than you think. We assume that time is just this fixed thing and we can't do anything about it. It's just point A to point B. The reality is that you can take actions that create time in the form of moments or in the form of experiences. We moved. We were living 3,000 miles away. I was seeing my parents once a year. We took control. We made a change. We moved across the country to live closer to both sets of our parents. The number of moments that I had left with my parents went from being maybe 15 to being in the hundreds, because suddenly I get to see my parents multiple times a month. So we took an action and created time in a very real and clear sense. That idea that you can take an action and actually create time changes the entire way that you live your life.
Yeah, I feel that the story of how you moved across the country to be closer to your parents is a beautiful one. I mean, we were living in Seattle for a while, and similar, like my parents are in New Jersey, but like you said, I think for us it was maybe 2-3 times a year that we were seeing them. But now it's like an exponential growth. But again, that is making a fundamental decision of like, I'm going to prioritize relationships. And I feel like when we're so locked into other things, I feel like relationships is kind of one of the number one things that falls by the wayside. One of the stories that I'll always remember is when I was hearing about Brian Chesky, the Airbnb founder. He was talking about his 40th birthday, and when he turned 40, he was thinking about like, okay, who am I going to invite to this party? And a lot of the people that he was inviting to the party were people that he hadn't spoken to in like 10 or 15 years. And he had spent like so much of his life over the previous 10 years building Airbnb, and relationships were the thing that, you know, fell by the wayside. I don't know if you're familiar with this story, but maybe
Yeah.
I've thought about that. So
Yeah, it is. Relationships in particular are one of those areas that very quickly fall to the back burner in our lives when we have other things. They're sort of the first light switch that gets flipped off, unfortunately. And even more, unfortunately, when you take into context the very clear science that shows that relationships are the single most important factor for how well you age. The Harvard study of adult development is this amazing study. They tracked the lives of 2,000 people over the course of 85 plus years. They found that the single greatest predictor of physical health at age 80 was relationship satisfaction at age 50. It wasn't blood pressure, it wasn't cholesterol, it wasn't smoking or drinking habits. It was how you felt about your relationships that determined how well you aged. And yet, it's the first thing that we forget to think about when we get busy or when life gets chaotic. The mindset shift here that we all need to have is to recognize that investments in your relationships are the best investment that you can make. That a tiny thing done today is going to compound positively in those areas. So even when you're busy, take the second to send the text to the friend when you're thinking about them. Call your mom on the ride home from work, even if you only have 2 minutes to do it or 5 minutes to do it. Be the catalyst to get that old group of friends together for the annual trip that is so easy to let fall by the wayside as you start to get older. Get coffee with the old friend. Do those tiny little things, the tiny little investments, because they pay dividends just as well as any financial investment will.
Yeah, I mean, the idea of calling your mom on your way home or something, there's something connecting about it of she's then entering into your daily life, whatever. You're just on your commute and then you just call. It's she's immersing yourself in your day in some sort of, or even if it's just a friend that you're calling that you haven't spoke to in a while. You highlighted 3 different types of friends in your book, which I thought was super interesting. Can you highlight what those are?
Yeah. There's this concept. I first heard it from Tyler Perry, is this Medea character, wise aunt, I think. And the concept is that there are 3 types of friends: leaves, branches, and roots. Leaves are sort of seasonal. They are the relationships that are there during the bright, sunny days when times are good. But as soon as the winds start to blow or it gets cold, they'll be gone. Branches are a little bit stronger, but we need to be careful not to lean too much on them because they'll break off and fall off the tree. And the roots are the friends that are there across all of the different seasons of your life. They are deep and strong and broad. And the important point here is to cherish your roots, to identify who those roots are in your life, to cherish them, and then to be a root to someone else in your life.
When it comes to, we talked about money success so much. I feel like a lot of our world is dominated by networking and stuff like that, or always feeling like you're surrounded by people who are trying to get something out of you. What did you feel that, especially when you were living out in Silicon Valley, right? In the sense that a lot of people feel like they can't even find people in their life that could be a darkest hour friend or someone that's very rooted in their life. And so it feels like a lot of those connections are kind of on this outer circle of people, and so that they don't develop intimate friendships with people.
It's very hard to make friends as an adult. No one teaches you how to make friends when you're not in school. I had this conversation recently with Derek Thompson, journalist at The Atlantic. And we were talking about the fact that for a lot of friendships are built through these thick institutions, where you're kind of really sticky and stuck in these thick environments. And school is one of those. And our whole life, we make all of our friends through being in school. Then it becomes work is really the only thick institution in your life. So you are told you're supposed to make your friends at work. Those tend to be a lot of those networking type relationships where it's transactional, it's quid pro quo in nature, or as Arthur Brooks would call them, deal friends. And it's very hard to find other institutions or other places or other rooms where you can build true, genuine relationships with people that are real friends, not the deal friends. Religion used to be actually a big one for that. It was your church. You would meet a lot of your closest friends. And now with religion on the decline, particularly in the US, it's hard. I talk about in the book this idea of finding value-aligned rooms, finding places that naturally self-select or filter for the type of values that you hold close. So if you are very into health, going to rooms, whether it's gyms, farmers markets, hiking trails, places that naturally self-select for people that are into those similar things as you, that have similar values or interests, that's sort of a good way to put yourself into environments where you might meet and be able to connect with and engage with people who are on a similar wavelength to you in life. Doing things like that, I think, is a tried and true path to starting to find and cultivate those deeper relationships. The second piece to this is recognizing that true depth in relationships is built through vulnerability. You create incredible connection when you are willing to open up and have shared struggle with somebody. Shared struggle actually scientifically releases oxytocin. It creates feelings of love and connection with the person. It's the reason people who come back from war end up feeling so deeply connected to the people that they were in the war with. That same rule applies to your life. If you are not willing to be vulnerable, to open up, to be honest, and to share struggle with someone, you will never experience the depth and richness of that relationship on the other side.
Yeah, we were talking offline and about how much rich insight and detail there was in your book. One of the things that I felt was really helpful for people, you were talking about the idea of vulnerability, but even in terms of like, even if you're just meeting somebody for the first time, the questions that you ask them, conversation starters, how to deepen in conversations with people. There were so many little tools that you had that I felt like were just so useful for people in terms of, connecting with people deeply. Can you share what some of those are?
Yeah. Is one of my favorite parts about the book, by the way, is just like that I was able to include a bunch of these things that I think of as like little guidebooks for life in small little areas. The conversations one was actually prompted by my sister-in-law who was in her first like career role, and she was saying like she gets so nervous at these networking or work events. She's like, I don't know how to talk to people. No one ever teaches you how to talk to people at these things. And I was like, oh, it would be really interesting to just put together a guide of different topics or questions, things that you can talk about. My favorite go-to question when you're engaging with people, trying to create a conversation is, first off, recognize that what you're trying to do is create doorknobs versus stop signs. I think this comes from improv, the world of improv. A doorknob is a question that invites someone to walk through it and tell a story. A stop sign is a question that just invites an answer that stops the conversation. So asking someone, where did you get married? That's a stop sign question. They're going to answer it with a place. The doorknob version of that is to say, how did you choose where you got married? Because then the person has to tell a story, and sometimes there's going to be something funny and family conflict. It invites a story. So what you're trying to do is create doorknobs in conversation. One of my favorite versions of that is to ask someone, what are they getting most excited about right now? Because you are going to get them talking about something that they are excited about. And when you do that, it all of a sudden just like lifts the entire conversation in a positive direction. It no longer becomes this kind of like tense early dynamic. So I would use that as a go-to in any uncomfortable environment.
Yeah, I mean, and then you had some like creative follow-ups as well. I think that really, even just like a small interaction that you have with somebody, how you can take that interaction like a couple steps further. What were those?
One of my favorite ways to have a sort of sticky connection after the fact is to send someone a book. I used to do this in my early career years. I did this religiously, where when I would meet someone that I sort of had some level of connection with, that I wanted to continue to build a relationship with, I would find their address, like for their office or whatever it was, and I would send them like one of my favorite books. And just put a handwritten note in the book of like, hey, enjoyed our conversation, thought you'd really enjoy this book for this reason, and send it to them. Immediately, you stand out in their mind. It's like the person took the time to send me this thing, to write a handwritten note, to mail this thing to me. It's like an incredible way of differentiating yourself. And it led to some of my most impactful mentor relationships in my entire life.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's funny, the ideas that you mentioned around the starting the conversation and the follow-ups. I had originally read a book, it's probably like 5 years now, on storytelling. And like they were taught, and this pertained to interviewing people and asking interview questions, but you mentioned the doorknob and the stop sign thing. There are ways in which you can engage people that by the way that you phrase a question, it immediately just leads to, like you said, like a one-word answer. And then there are other ways which is going to immediately like open them up. I mean, the most common question that people get, I feel like that some people might get frustrated is like, well, what do you do? What do you do and that's
worst question in the world. Because it's the worst question in the world for a very particular reason, which is I would argue that over well over 50% of people are very uncomfortable about their answer that they have to that question. Either they are not proud of what they do, or they don't feel like it fits perfectly, so they start rambling, which was me, by the way. Like, I used to have a very clear answer. When I worked in finance, I was like, could say like, I'm a vice president at whatever. I'm a vice president at a private equity fund. Sounds impressive. Okay, I'm done. I give my one sentence, it's done. Now, when I started like down the different path that I was going down, I didn't know what to say. So people would ask me that and I'd be like, well, I write, I have a newsletter. I also do some investing. I have some companies. And like, by the time you've said 3 sentences, people's eyes glaze over and they're just like, this person doesn't do anything. There's, it's like the LinkedIn profile where the person has 30 things and you're just like, I assume they're unemployed and they do nothing. And it's a big challenge for people. It makes you uncomfortable in those situations when you don't have the clear one-liner. So just don't ask it. Because it very rarely sparks an interesting dialogue.
It's such a default thing, though. It's like you're just sitting there and then you're like, so what do you do?
Yeah.
And then it's just like, you don't really know what to say. And so that's why like that section of the book like really stuck out to me. Because I feel like people really do need practical skills of how to like begin conversations, continue conversations with people that don't just lead down these paths of subconsciously making people feel uncomfortable about what they're doing with their life. So
yeah, that's why I think the excited question is a better one too. It's just like, what are you getting most excited about right now? Now, the other person can take it and run with work. Say like, oh, I'm really excited about this project that we're working on. Here's what it is. Here's why I'm excited about it. Or it could be like, my kid's 4 and they're on their first baseball team and I'm so excited about coaching it because it's been a blast. And then it gets them animated, talking about their family. You can ask about their kids. How many do they have? Like, right? It leads to something that you can take and run with. Versus, I ask you what you do. You're like, oh, I'm a lawyer. Or what do I do? Oh, that must be fun. Like, what do I say next? I don't know where to go from there. There's nothing that I can take. It sort of ends the conversation. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's good. So, I mean, we've covered a lot of ground, relationships, talking about time, wealth. One thing I just wanted to land on was kind of culmination of a lot of these ideas, and that is this Japanese word ikigai. So I'm gonna pull up the diagram for people watching on video here that you created. So you have these like 4 circles of like what you love, what you're good at, what the world needs, and what you can be paid for. This really resonated with me a lot because I think a lot of people wish they could find some sort of like middle ground or like stability in between these ideas of like this kind of like perfect cadence to my life where like I can be doing something, that I love, that I'm good at, and that people are paying for. And so in some senses, it feels like this is just like the ongoing puzzle that you're trying to figure out. And so can you explain that concept and like what are some kind of tips to approach that for people?
We know scientifically that purpose improves life. Actually reduces all-cause mortality. A clear sense of purpose actually helps you live longer. But most people don't know how to go about starting to identify what are those things that might make me feel that level of purpose on a daily basis. The traditional Japanese idea of ikigai is a way of thinking about or a framing that you can start to sort of identify the things, the pursuits that might create that feeling in your life. The westernized version is what we just shared, which is the 4 circles. It has that 4th circle, which is what you can be paid for. I think the more traditional and actually better interpretation is to remove that circle. So the 3 circles would be what you love, what you're good at, and what the world needs. Reason being, generally speaking, depending on how you define world, that will mean if you're providing something that the world needs, you will be paid for it. It just depends on how you are defining world in that sense. The quickest way to start honing in on this is to just walk through the exercise of starting to sketch out what falls into each of those circles. Sit down with a piece of paper, split it into 3 columns, and start writing down things, activities, pursuits, interests, different things that do fall into those individual buckets, and then start looking at what the overlap might be. The way that you define world is really important. Your world could be your family unit.
Yeah.
It might be that you're going to define world and say that like, well, my family needs me to be a provider right now. They need me to do that because we're on tough times and we really need to lock in order to create the world that we want. Your world, as you start to progress, could be your local community. Your world could be your company that you work at. Your world could be quite literally the world. Like, I think Elon Musk probably defines his world as humanity, the human species. And so he needs to create an interplanetary species. Like, you can justify that. You can create that in your mind. Going through that exercise of starting to sketch those things out is a good way to just zoom out a bit and start to identify those things in your life.
Yeah, I mean, it ties back a lot into some of the ideas that we were discussing earlier about, skills and things not necessarily having to be tied to your career. And I mean, even when it comes to somebody that is a stay-at-home mom, right? And so there's many years that they're at home with their kid. And what does that exercise look like for somebody like that versus, I don't know, somebody that is trying to work their way up the corporate ladder as an entrepreneur is like very different.
Yeah. I mean, my wife went through this exact thing. My wife was like fast track star designer within like a very competitive career as a fashion designer. And when our son was born, she was really excited about the idea of, during this season of life while he is young, being a mom and being home with him and spending a lot of time and immersed in that relationship. And for her to be able to have an understanding that the world, as she defined it, was our family unit, and what the world needed from her in that moment was to be the mom that she knew she was capable of being. And to be able to step back and say, like, that is my purpose. That is what I love. That is what I'm great at. And that's what the world needs from me right now. And I'm going to lean into that as my purpose during this season of life. That is so important to add that last piece. Because what you define as your purpose during any one season of life can change and will change across the various seasons. When our son is older, when our children that we eventually have are older, she may very well decide that what the world needs is very different, that she can go back and be a designer or start her own brand or do other things. What you focus on during any one season does not tie you to that thing for all future seasons. And what you're going to do in the future doesn't change what you need to focus on during the present.
Yeah, I would imagine that with the idea of the dimmer thing that we were talking about earlier, it comes in.
Exactly. Yeah. And you can ride those different waves of life. It is very much, I talk about this in the book, this idea of like being a surfer riding a wave, that you can just enjoy the present wave for all of its beauties, for all of its imperfections, with the knowledge that there are always more waves coming.
Yeah. The other thing that kind of made me think about is like, when we're operating what we feel like our purpose is in the given moment, I feel like it's like a very felt experience, and even the way that we're spending our time. And what I found to be amazing in your book was this kind of, I don't know, call it like a just right equilibrium, but you cited a study from 2020 on the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, which revealed that both too little and too much free time led to unhappiness. And so I was really struck by the statistical significance of that study, because there were 35,000 people that were involved in the study. But that's what I was talking about with the felt experience, is like many of us can feel like something is out of balance, or we're doing something or operating in a particular way that we feel like that isn't really meant for what we're supposed to be doing in the given moment. So
yeah, that's an amazing study. It's Cassie Holmes. She wrote a book called Happier Hour, where she cites that study. It's amazing. I mean, you look at free time and happiness, and basically it's an inverse U. So like, the too little free time, you're very unhappy. Too much free time, you're very unhappy. In the middle, there's like this Goldilocks, this just right amount. The idea of balance has been hijacked. You've been told that balance means every single day has to be perfectly balanced, a perfect mix of personal time, health, family, life, work, that each day has to be that way. Otherwise, something's wrong and you're out of balance. That's not how life works. The reality is that balance is a seasons concept, not a days concept. It's okay to have a whole season of unbalance in service of working towards a season of balance. That's often how life works. So during those seasons of unbalance, when you are sprinting on things, when you're leaning into something, it's important to not stress yourself out or to create anxiety over the idea that your days are not balanced during that period. That's okay, as long as you acknowledge that it is in service of working towards a season of balance to come.
Yeah, I mean, for me, that's where that dimmer concept come back. And then even just doing the little things. I mean, if you're working like a 12-hour day every day, can you spend 10 minutes doing breathing exercises? Can you eat good food like during the day? Can you make space for like a 15-minute exercise type of thing? And I feel like that like is really helpful in terms of getting through those seasons.
100%.
Oh, I just have that three. We've been talking for a couple hours. I have like three kind of, I guess, people groups that I want to speak to. I mean, the book is just packed with so much insight, so we'll put that in the description. I really feel like you need to like chew on it, and people can get that out of it. But if you could imagine like three people sitting in front of you, the first one, like person who thinks that money is going to solve all their problems, what would you say to them? They're listening.
Money solves money problems and not much else. It definitely will solve the money problems. If the problems are those basic needs, shelter, food, taking care of some people around you, reducing some of those fundamental stresses, it will solve those. But beyond that point, it will no longer solve your problems. It will just create new ones at some point. So recognize that, be aware of that along the journey.
And then the person who's kind of slaving away and isn't making time for anything else, what would your advice be for them?
Time is your most precious asset. It is the only thing that you can never get back. So make sure to zoom out, recognize that the amount of time you have left with the people you care about most is much more finite than you'd ever care to admit.
Really good. And then lastly, the person listening who doesn't feel like they have a strong sense of purpose.
Your purpose in life does not have to be grand or ambitious or impressive to anyone else. It just has to be yours. It takes a lot of courage to step off a good path to find your path, but it's very rarely a decision that you'll regret.
Oh, good. Thank you so much for being here. I really enjoyed this conversation and excited for people to watch and buy the book. So
thank you. This was great.